Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of PGTips. I'm Gary in Stockholm.
And I'm Paul in Barnsley. Hi, everyone.
So, Paul, last time we were talking about the idea of maybe going deeper into the process of picture book creating, and we thought we'd start with characters. And you have a really good process that you've developed through time with the help of some inspiration from different sources. So let's talk a little bit about that and then dive in.
Yep, that's true, Gary, because we said we'd learned the phrase, let's go deeper with picture books, and you asked me how. So we do know how, but it's taken years of our learning and reading things and attending conferences. We've both got bookshelves that's full of useful books. I know you've got some. We've swapped ideas before. I've got some on mine. We're going to show our viewers some of them. One that I find really useful is Anne Whitford Paul's book, How to Write in picture books. And we're going to show you that one. So useful that in the past, I've kind of distilled different episodes and chapters from that and used it for my own purpose in workshops, but when I'm working as well. And it often makes me think, do like really successful illustrators just innately know this? Do they just work and they know it? Or are they always like checking these things that we're about to tell you about? So we're going to give you some really hot practical tips on how to go deeper with your picture books, as Gary said, starting with characters. And we're going to kick off with what I call this picture book character mantra sheet. And we're going to make that available for people. There'll be a link for Google Drive. And it tells you about how to make compelling characters. And we're going to finish up with a character profile, getting deeper under your character's skin. So we're going to start off by looking at each of those headings. So, Gary, you're going to pick up the first of these character traits that we need to look at.
Great. So the first trait is to make your picture book character likable. And we have a couple of examples. Tony Ross's Little Princess is a great example in Clipper by Mick Inkpen. It's super helpful to have a likable character, especially in a picture book where we want to identify with the characters themselves very much. And so it's worth diving into the ways to make a picture book character likable.
That's right. Even if in the example, Little Princess, she's got a bad temper, she has tantrums, it's something that kids can recognize and relate to. But in the end, ultimately, it's a likable character. I mean, I guess most characters are likable, aren't they? But you've got to keep that in mind as you're working, depending what other traits they've got. The second one that we're going to pick up on is having your character solve their own problems. And that is really important. You don't want a child with a problem who's asking an adult how to solve it and letting the adult solve the problem. It might make slightly interesting story, but it's not going to be as compelling. The archetypal modern version of this is Mouse in Gruffalo's Child. The mouse is in control, brilliantly solves its own problem, both with the animals wanting to eat it as it goes through the woods, and then when it meets the Gruffalo, still in control. That's brilliant. And I know Max, Ed Veer's Max is one of your favorites. You said you read it with your boys.
Yeah.
Max in the different stories, the little cat is always in control. And it's fun. It's fun, isn't it? Just to see that small childlike character, but in control of their own problems and story.
Yeah, definitely don't want to have the adults solve everything for you, both as a kid and even as an adult. We want to solve our own problems. We want to dive in and be the kind of main character in our own story. And we want that feeling when we develop our likable characters that they actually are on their own particular quest. And so those examples you gave, Max, is fantastic. And there are lots of other examples from the picture book world. But when we see picture books that aren't quite working, sometimes they tend to have an external person saying you should do this or you should do that, or maybe trying to give a lesson. And actually the lessons are usually best solved by the character themselves, as opposed to some other person or someone telling you, oh, this is how you do this is how you fix that.
Exactly. Yeah, it can be life enhancing and character building for the little reader that's reading it.
Yeah. If we look at the next tip, we have the idea of someone the reader cares about. I mean, we have some good examples. We have Benji Davies, The Storm Whale. We have Miffy by Dick Bruna, and we have Lucy Cousins' Maisie as well. To have a character that the reader cares about, that a reader identifies with, and that the reader feels like actually has compassion for other characters can help a lot sometimes in creating your own picture book.
I think lots of the traits we're going to talk about all help to make you care about that character. You've ultimately got to care about the character. And like you said, Benji Davies' Storm Whale, we care about little Noe, who's found this whale on the beach. Well, I think we also care about the whale. So we tie with their stories. So you make that connection. Yeah. Next, we're going to look at an imperfect character, which is a really nice, delicious character trait to have someone that's imperfect. Because most people have got flaws. The character needs to have a flaw so that you can correct that during the story. They learn something in this story arc. And one of my favorites, and we put that on there, is Chris Houghton's George. It's called Oh George or Oh No George, where you just know the dog is not going to behave. The story is about him being imperfect. Can he not resist that temptation of the cake when his owner's left the house? And we know he's not going to resist that. But again, in the end, it's a likable character because you just love that dog. Now, what other examples have we got here? We've got Rabbit and Bear. The rabbit is quite testy, irritable, and Julian Gough and Jim Field's Rabbit and Bear. But ultimately, we like him. But you enjoy reading about his bad temper. It's part of the illustrator and writer's voice, I think, that comes through in the rabbit. You just love that little rabbit character.
Yeah, definitely. And moving on from this idea of being imperfect is also being childlike. And what character could be more childlike and innocent and at the same time very wise than Winnie the Pooh? So many of us have identified with Winnie the Pooh through the years. And it's this kind of childlike, but at the same time, almost like adult-like kind of feeling that you get from Winnie the Pooh. And it's he's quite obviously a beautiful character that's spoken to many of us, but it's also the wisdom that comes through. So sometimes the logic, the childlike logic is also there, which is really interesting. And then we have a couple of other examples. We have, Mick Inkpen Kipper again. And I really like Hugless Douglas. I think what a character, this crazy character that just wants to be, have affection. And I think that's so super important, that the characters are childlike.
It's funny, when we were looking for examples of these, lots of them are bears like Winnie the Pooh, Hugless Douglas, Paddington. So lots of examples of little bears that are obviously childlike. And even if it's an adult, you can't have an adult just acting with adult sentiments all the time if it's going to attract a child reader. So an adult's got to have some childish attributes. I particularly like Hugless Douglas because it's almost slapstick in a way, in the way that he's demonstrating his childlike manners.
Yeah.
And then another favorite and another classic is an active character, not a passive character. And the perfect example of that is Max in Where the Wild Things Are. He's definitely not passive. He got his temper again. He wants to make things happen. He's going to make things happen. And he stomps off and enjoys this riotous night with the wild things. But again, he comes back home, he's behaving childly, he settles down and goes to bed. But a character that drives the story, makes something happen in the story. And another perfect example of that is Viv Schwartz's book. It's called Anna. It's How to Find Gold is the title. And it's Anna, who is a little child character with Crocodile. And they set off to look for gold. And a perfect, lovely line from that is, I think it's the crocodile said, well, it's going to be dangerous. It's going to be tricky. And she said something like, I hope so. Come on, let's go. She's not daunted by any of that. She's going to make things happen. She's a character that drives the story forward.
that ties in with the idea of like solving their own problems, because when you're an active character, you're out there you're on your own journey, you know, and that's the way we want to feel as we're developing our characters too, that these characters themselves are on a journey. They're active, they are childlike, they are pursuing the goal and trying to solve the problems themselves. And at the same time, there's this idea of be kind of behaving believably, at least within the context of the story itself. We buy the idea that this character is in this world, and the things that they do tie in with that. You know, we have Charlie and Lola by Lauren Child, who's really these, you know, two characters that just seem like they're actually real people, you know. And it's really strange how that is, and this kind of wisecracking smart remarks that they make, I think is really interesting. And then also, yeah, Benji Davies comes up again with Granddad's Island, this relationship of the boy with the granddad, and this kind of missing the granddad, and then seeing and living this kind of life with that, with the idea that this granddad is there with him too. And I think it's very, very, very beautiful. And at the same time, it's not far-fetched, even though what we find out through the course of the story may seem surprising. We still feel like, oh, this is like real or believable.
Yeah.
Believable is better than real, right?
Stretches credibility, but not beyond belief.
Yeah. So I really think, you know, there's a lot to that as well. This idea of believability as opposed to reality or believability. Yeah.
So, having mentioned all these different traits like likability, passive, not active, being likable, you might still be saying, well, how do we do that? Now that you know that you need to do that, how do you do that? And one really good way of doing that, and one that we've used before, is to fill out a character interrogation sheet or a character profile sheet. Now, you'll see an image on screen there where there's 3 different ones. There's some really comprehensive and detailed ones that I think probably novelists might use. Hundreds of questions where you think about your character. So you're going deeper under your character's skin, get to know your character inside out. And it helps then to push them into a likable manner, or make them passive, not active, not passive. But you need to do that to understand your character. So again, there'll be one of these sheets on Google Drive, so you can download that. That's what me and Gary have designed. That's a simpler one for picture book characters. So ask yourself about your character's appearance. You should all know that, even if you're just a writer, you should know about your character's appearance. Jot it down. Give notes for your illustrator. Where does your character live? Its favorite food, its enemies, its good friends. What does it like? What does it dislike? What is your character really good at? Some of these things you might not know, because we've done this, haven't we, Gary, at workshops, sat down, talked about our own characters.
I have to say, Paul, one of the best of the workshops that I've been at the Picture Book Retreat was when you introduced this, and I think it's something that could be almost done every year, because we can tend to, as we get into, like, let's say, the story, to forget about the pre-work, the characters. And then when you and I especially talk to the most successful writers and illustrators, they're doing a lot of pre-work. It's almost like the actual writing of the story comes really after all this pre-work that you never see normally. And when you sort of dive in and you say, yeah, but how did you make that character so good? How come it can be so simple and yet be so effective? And they repeatedly say to us things like, yeah, I not only drew the character and developed the character, I also thought, oh, well, this is, you know, what the character's grandparents were like, and trace the whole history. All kinds of things like that are super important. And we tend to just want to get on with the story before we've done that work. So I think that's been super helpful. And it was one of those things I really enjoyed as a workshop. And I think it's important for everyone to dive more and more into.
It is. It's surprising when you first hear someone say that. And you think, what? You've actually sat down and you've thought about all the things that might not happen in your story, but it's things that your character knows about. So that you know in future that your character's not going to take that action, because no, he wouldn't do that. You understand your character more. And that says a lot about character motivation, which is a major driving force in your plot and narrative, character motivation. And if you know what motivates your character, what he would like, what he wouldn't like, what he would love for his birthday. What she might write if she was given a chance to enter a competition, what she might like to win.
That's right. Her favorite food, color, any of those things, and all those things can somehow sometimes play in even as like secondary or tertiary elements in a story. It's, super helpful to do this work. In fact, I think it's, imperative that we do this pre-work. And I think it's one of the only ways that lead to really a fully developed character, but a character that also people like and identify with and feel is real.
As illustrators as well, I think it helps us visualize it, and we can draw the character because we've got all this background information.
Definitely.
So if you download that, I would recommend people add extra questions to it as well, fill it out, make it even more detailed. Makes me laugh when I remember the last one on there is one secret that even you didn't know. I did this with my niece, 10-year-old niece, and she said, well, if it's a secret I don't know it. Well, okay, I said, well, maybe that could be a story idea in itself. Your character's got a big secret and everyone's trying to guess what it is. So that could be a starting point for that.
Exactly. Yeah. Sometimes you find, other kinds of avenues and different things that you might not have even thought about by going through the process. So it's super helpful.
And if you don't have a work in progress or a character in mind, just invent one just as an exercise for this. We've done it at Picture Book Retreat. Take your initials like Paul Morton, switch them around, MP. I've done it before, so I could say Mechanical Penguin, a character that begins with your initials. So just think Mechanical Penguin, jot that down, fill that sheet out. Do it lots of times, get into the practice of going deeper with your characters. That helps your picture book become successful. In future, we're going to be covering other topics that are important, all the elements that make up a good picture book.
Yes, things like motivation, pace, how we make good beginnings, great endings. So there's a lot of different aspects that we can cover and hopefully give some practical tips for, because one of the things that is super important for us is to actually give tips that are useful for people who are watching. And if you're developing your picture book career or your writing career, to sort of have some handles to place things onto so you can develop as quickly as possible.
So it helps us as well, you and I. We're talking about this, we're reminding ourselves about this. It's something that's active in our minds all the time when we're thinking about our own books. So it's useful for us, and hopefully it's been useful for everyone else. So watch this space for the next podcast.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you all. And thanks a lot, Paul. See you next time, everybody.
Yep, thank you. Bye, everyone.